Hello, I'm back. So this will conclude our discussion of conflict and peacemaking. An intractable conflict between two sides. The word intractable means something to the effect as if you're going to go in and extract like a bone out of your chest or something, you can't take it out. It's like it's intractable. You can't remove it. And so it's an immovable, impossible conflict between two sides. In this situation, each group sees its own goals as supremely important, which means, hey, our goals supersede theirs. Our needs are above theirs, and so it doesn't matter that we make more because we're more important. Uh, they take pride in us and devalue them. Uh, each side believes it's victimized. It is a victim. So they play, the victim card. They tend to elevate patriotism, solidarity, and loyalty to their group needs, to their group. They celebrate self-sacrifice and suppress criticism within the group. And so you have these mirror image perceptions. Both sides contain those ideas. And so these reciprocal views of each other are often held by parties in conflict. So you see this on multiple levels. So again, I want you to keep the individual, the group, society. So you can see this in a warring couple that are fighting over the kids that are going through a nasty divorce. You can see this in groups in a family. Bigger groups. This family doesn't like this family, so there's all this conflict. You see this definitely in communities. One side of the track doesn't like the other side of the track. You see this in our society, in our political wars, our faction, our left versus right. Um, you see these sort of things, and each views itself as moral and peace loving, and the other is evil and aggressive, and that's a bad state to be in. So how does one make peace? How do we make peace? So number one is make contact with the other person. So what we tend to do is we tend to withdraw into our own parties, our own camps, and our own tribes, and just say, forget the other, forget the other side. That's not what evidence says. That's not what evidence says that we need to do. So we have social media now where we just retreat into our own little chat rooms and our own little echo chambers where we only hear our own, our news feed only promotes what we believe already. And so in a meta-analysis of 516 studies, this is looking at so many different studies. Imagine reading through half of 1,000 studies, looking at 250,000 people in 38 different countries. 94% of those studies concluded that increased contact predicted decreased prejudice. So in our own country, when we chose to desegregate schools, and that was met with a lot of hostility. It was met with a lot of anger, particularly by people who had power when they chose to desegregate schools. But what you found over time is that relations tended to get better. Now, did it completely solve all the problems that are still present, obviously, in our racial relationship in America? No. But it did make an impact, and I would say overall it led to more equality. Although there is an equality, I still think that there were previously lower levels, and those have improved. Now, there's still work to be done, but that being said, more interracial contact, looking at other countries between in South Africa where you had apartheid, and it was a similar type of situation where the people in power tried to separate races. But the more interracial contact between South African black people and white people have, the less prejudice they feel toward one another, the more sympathetic their policy attitudes are to those of the other group. And the more friendly contact between racial groups, the better their attitudes toward one another. So how would you apply this then in, American versus Middle Eastern relationships? How would you apply this? How would you think about this? The more contact straight people have with gay and lesbian people, the more accepting they become. Even so, this is breaking down all these 516 studies. Even vicarious, indirect contact via storytelling, imagination, or a friend having an outgroup friend decreases prejudice. So, you always have that. Well, I've got this one such and such friend. Well, okay, yeah, that's not the best. It's better than nothing. It's not the best, but yeah, obviously you'd want to have a wide variety and a diverse group of friends to help decrease prejudice. Um, for instance, desegregated rifle companies in World War II, 11%, 1 out of 10 of the segregated companies approved. And so you have this system justification, the human tendency to just, oh, we're just going to stick with the way things are. We're going to stick with the status quo. That's not going to work. However, 60% of desegregated companies approved. And so after they had been desegregated, you see this huge acceptance. Well, yeah, this isn't a bad thing. This is a good thing. However, I will say that desegregation does not work all the time, especially when there is anxiety or perceived threat. So again, there has to be this mutual trust that's built, and there are many things going on in our society that that decreases that trust. There also should be an equal status contact, and what I mean by that is now balancing the scale where parties are equal. Contact on an equal basis, just as a relationship between people of unequal status breeds attitudes consistent with their relationship, so do relationships between those of equal status. So, thus, to reduce prejudice, interracial contact should ideally be between people equal in status. So, it shouldn't be, for instance, if we're reaching out to help a let's say an underdeveloped country, it shouldn't be where, oh well, we're the savior, we're coming in, we're trying to help. That's not the approach. The approach should be one of humility, one of equal status partnership, where it's not just, okay, well, you're going to do what I said because I know it's better. I'm going to talk to you. We're going to sit down as equals and come up with a way that can make your life better. So common external threats also tend to build cohesiveness. So example, you look at presidential ratings during wartime. You looked after 9/11 and George Bush's approval ratings were 90%. You look at his father during the Persian Gulf War in the early 90s, same type of thing. His father had about 80% approval rating during wartime. And so that a common enemy can build cohesiveness among people. You also look at a superordinate goal, meaning a shared goal that overrides people's differences with one another. And so if for instance, you look at in the 1930s in the United States, when our economy completely crashed and we were coming out of the Depression, people started those really high tax rates. People started pooling their resources together and thought, what, we can do this together. We can make things better together by sharing our resources. And so that common enemy, that common driver for a goal tends to unite people. And so I'll go down, I'll finish these last two. You can go to the Sharif research on page 505. But then also I think it's important for us to note that that our global economies are completely interlinked. You look at the tariffs being enacted by the United States against other countries. You see that kind of backfiring in that we're now subsidizing farmers because they can't sell their food. So we're basically going in the hole to prove a point to another country, but that's another point. Cooperative learning, cooperative team sport participation appears to increase favorable attitudes. Form teams without group members. So again, if you're cooperating, you tend to get a collaboration, and you tend to break down barriers. International collaborations in space and science and joint efforts to address hunger and limited resources tend to improve international relationships. So if we can, band together and try to do things as an international community, that tends to bring down conflict. This is a game. I'm not going to go into it here. This really have to be face to face. But there's a game that you involve these sort of techniques, but we won't do that here. So resolving conflict. There are different ways of thinking here. One of the traditional ways has been, and I would say this goes back thousands of years, is that, well, the only way to achieve peace is through victory. You crush your opponents, and therefore they can do nothing but submit. I guess one could make the argument that in World War II there were such losses that that happened. But that's not the only avenue. You could also have peace through justice, where if you balance the scales, you cooperate, you begin to see more peace. The one thing that is difficult for the people to understand, I feel like we've lost this, especially in the past few years, is that after World War II, it ended with the detonation of nuclear weapons. And in the Cold War between the United States and the former Soviet Union, we learned that this is a zero-sum game. If we start attacking that side, they're going to be able to inflict enough damage on us that we're both going to be dead. There is going to be a zero-sum game. Nobody's going to end up winning. Both sides are going to end up losing. And so that peace through victory needs to be rethought, particularly in the wake of what we can do with our weapons now. And I don't know that that's necessarily being thought of, but it's important. I'm not going to go into this. This is probably something that you can look into on your own time. It goes with our supplemental text. But basically what I'm trying to say by using that big slide there, is we have group and superordinate identities. In everyday life, we often reconcile multiple identities. We are students, we are workers, we are sons, daughters, wives, husbands, mothers, fathers, grandparents. We are remember this party, remember that party. We occupy multiple identities, and so what we do is acknowledge our subgroup identity and then transcend it. Trying to remove ourselves and try to become objective in our thinking, which is, I know it seems impossible today, but by being mindful of our multiple identities and that other people also have multiple identities, we can maybe think of being more socially cohesive, being more aware of each other, and being more accepting. So I am many things. This is quote at the bottom of the page. I am many things, some of which you are too. Recognize our commonality. And so a multicultural awareness, we recognize that we each belong to multiple cultures. Even, quote, marginal people who have neither a strong ethnic nor strong mainstream cultural identity, these folks often have low self-esteem. Bicultural people who affirm more than one cultural identity usually have a stronger positive self-concept. All citizens can keep their identities and take pride in their ancestry and have a sense of belonging. However, highlighting multicultural differences tends to breed hostility. And now in Rwanda, the government stopped all Hutu and Tutsi references. And I quote, there is no ethnicity here. We are all Rwandan.